everybody. Chief Alkinator, welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to continue our discussion on emotions and how they may overlay on the ChangeGrid. So far, we've looked at a lot of different models and had very little success in finding one that actually would easily overlay. That being said, they are models that give us all sorts of very interesting like an interesting collection of emotions that we could certainly use for adjective mapping. And so by the time we're done with all this, we will end up on the adjective map, and we'll spend some time talking about the emotions that are already on the adjective map and what emotions we might want to add to it to help flesh it out. But this morning I received a wonderful email from Josef, who said that he had given some thought and done some exploration on the subject of emotions and where they land on the ChangeGrid. And he sent me 3 very nice diagrams and an email with a little bit of narrative. But rather than me just read all that to you, I'll just say, so Josef, tell people how this all came to be and what your thoughts are.
I think it's great.
So now you're put on the spot, right?
Of course I'm putting you on the spot. It's the
Well,
Circle of Brilliance. So.
Yeah, of course.
It's
so you should look for somebody real brilliant.
Right, yeah, go ahead, David, what were you saying?
I was just going to say it's interesting to see anger in the out-grid danger zone.
Yeah.
And that's part of the discussion. So I'm ready to address that. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I am not an expert on these topics, but I am a sales trainer, and I found especially this topic useful in a sales situation, because emotions you can really discover. So you can see if someone is frightened or sad or disgusted or angry. So that that triggered some interest in this topic. And so I went to this Paul Ekman website, Atlas of Emotions.org, and he seemed like an authority on emotions. So I stuck to the 5 emotions that he described. So from the description, I tried to plot the main emotions on the from the discussion about the neurotransmitters. I understood that enjoyment should be in the center, which is also called love sometimes. Mm-hmm. And then I started to plot the other emotions, actually like negative emotions on the danger zones. That was the basic. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So fear was for me quite obvious because well, we know that from the training. And actually, so I thought anger and shame and these extreme emotions, well, we thought that they are really upgrid danger zone. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I started exploring the adjective map, and I didn't quite I couldn't really prove that anger should be outgrid, but I figured that if you are have a high low ability and a high challenge, that should strike fear, right?
Sure.
But sometimes there is also some emotion of reaction, like yelling or screaming, that might look like anger, but actually could be a fear response. So that's how I try to make sense of it. And the surprising one is actually disgust. Like I never understood that there was an emotion.
Right,
but if you think about it,
okay. Yeah.
well,
okay.
Well,
sure.
Shame on you. We're disgusted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that means, in that example, if you're disgusted about me, for example, that could mean that you think demeaning about me. So like you have more ability than me. So in a very basic primary response in the jungle, when you see a lion, then he has more ability than you, then you have to fear.
Sure.
So the opposite about that, when you find maybe the lion is discussed about you, but maybe he's hungry, so he has the feeling you can overpower him. So that I understood that the ability, if your ability is high, then maybe you would be disgusted, or even like Paul Ekman explains it, it is actually a safety for people not to touch poisonous things.
Absolutely, yeah.
So if you can be socially threatened by somebody inferior to you, then that might be a safety response. So so he explained it like that. But actually, I'm not sure about sadness and disgust. They could easily you might even switch them, but now I am calling the help from T, because that's a little bit of a stretch for me to speak about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll say that if you look at all four of these extremes, we all know that those are powerless points. And we know that those all come together the south pole of the change grid, and they are the exact same point. So the thought that someone who is at the powerless point might be feeling fear and sadness and anger and disgust, and move rapidly from one to another, maybe even experience some of them simultaneously, is not a stretch as far as our mapping of how these things would lay out when you turn it into a three-dimensional diagram, so into a sphere specifically. So I'm okay with that. Now, the second thing is that this idea about anger being outgrid, I have always thought that was certainly true, but I thought, is that a different kind of anger than people who are in the upgrid danger zone might be experiencing? And so in order to be outgrid and angry, you have to perceive yourself as being very able and the challenge being very high. And so I can see that someone's losing their temper, but it's coming out of a place of frustration. Or, that's also where, as you'll see in another diagram that Joseph put together, that's where the fight response is. So I can certainly see that that expression of anger is very aggressive. It's all those outgrid danger zone sorts of things. We don't need to repeat everything you guys have already heard. Now, when I think about the anger that someone experiences upgrid, so their ability is very low, the challenge is very high, they are angry, but I wonder if they're angry with others. Are they angry with themselves? Or is it just like an emotional response? Like I said, when you touch a hot stove, you become angry. So pain leads to anger. Anger and pain walk hand in hand. But that trigger, the pain causing the anger, feels to me somewhat different than the anger I might experience and display outgrid. What are your guys' thoughts around that?
This is Kathy. I love this. I'm connecting with this right away because I think that the distinction that you're making about anger, both aspects of anger are very real, because I was just noticing the kind of anger you're talking about that's upgrid in myself the other day. And it was quite a revelation. I said, my God, I'm really angry about this. And it's because I don't feel like I can do a task that I want to do. And who am I angry at? I'm angry at myself for not being able to do something that I expect myself to do. So I just wanted to just comment on that. And I do think that there is a distinction there, and it's an anger that comes from fear of not being able to do something.
And so would that be kind of more of the fear or the anger is coming from an unconscious place, a primal sort of place, where the anger that's outgrid is coming from more of a cognitive sort of place?
Yes, I think that's
this is Tom. I think you can only look at different responses to fear. So for example, some response to fear is very downgrade. In other words, terror has immediate response. It's so overwhelming, you know, that you've got something immediate. But if we're afraid of something emotionally, sometimes we go very down grid. And we could look at all of these and see the same thing. Anger can turn into depression if it's self-anger. And then it certainly isn't out grid. And so I think these are wonderful sort of, you use the word I liked, which is triggers. Then we have to go to psychometrics and patterns to see what's the response.
That's right. That's right.
I confess to you that I set up the chess, the online or the chess game, so that I was a 1, so that I could get lots of queens and just kill the computer. Well, we know that that's not enjoying for long, but at that moment, I was that far down grid, and I just want to beat this computer.
Right, right.
Even though overall enjoyment requires a much higher challenge than that. So that's just my point, that I think that this is a good balancing point, and then we have to recognize that people have different responses that could put us anywhere in the grid.
Yeah.
You know, there are those who would say psychologically that anger is a secondary emotion.
Yes.
And that it covers both fear and sadness. And some people would be much happier to stay angry because there's a sense of power in that than to feel the fear or to feel loss.
Yeah, so that would be out grid in that
Yeah.
case, if you were wired that way.
And I would argue that fear is at the core, is at the bottom of all of those out grid expressions. So I have a hard time isolating fear into one part of the change grid.
I think that's true.
Building on that, I would also suggest that disgust is its own form of anger, or can have anger along with it. You know, if you look at the word disgust, that's 2 words. So dis is against and gust is taste. So this is something that's disgusting. It usually has to do with this feeling that you're about to retch over it, you know, so it's less, there is this gustatory kind of element to that. So I would not be at all surprised to know that anger came right behind that, because, you know, why did the dog poop there? You know, so I'm disgusted and I'm angry. That now, I bring that up only to say that that anger that we're seeing out grid feels far more deliberate than it does in its secondary position, like for fear or disgust, top or bottom. It's like something frightened me and now I'm angry. Something disgusted me and now I'm angry. Well, if I go out grid, something pissed me off and now I'm angry. So,
but it's always a sense of gaining control over it, the out grid kind of anger.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know where to describe it, but the anger that is out grid feels far more deliberate, far more cognitive, far more conscious, like an assessment happened and this person is now really having an anger response. So yeah, I think that's interesting. And again, as long as we are all okay with the thought that these 4 places we're looking at are really all the exact same spot, then we can kind of see how sadness and fear might actually have an interaction, and sadness and disgust. In fact, if I look at the upgrid fear and the anger that comes along with that, and the outgrid anger, am I looking at a continuum all the way down that white line? Here I am pointing with a pencil instead of with a pointer. Learn the technology. So because I can kind of see that if I'm halfway in between, am I a little bit of fear and a little bit of anger? I do know this. In fact, I think David brought it up last time around, that halfway between outgrid and downgrid is the home base for frustration and resentment. And so when I hear frustration, I think frustration could disgust me, frustration could anger me. Resentment is definitely a variation on anger. You know, that whole idea about feeling that you're being held back by something or whatever. So I do think that there are continua, if that's a word, continuums that are in play here as
Well,
well.
resentment has an upgrade dimension too.
Yeah, certainly more upgrade than
Overall, it lives where you're pointing, but there's an up. In other words, if the world were different, I'd be fine. Yeah.
right, right. And
Yeah.
again, I wonder if it's because something external is what's
External, that's what I'm saying.
frustrating me versus just that frustration that's more of an internal
Yeah.
um, sort of a state. One other thing I'll bring to everyone's attention is this idea about disgust being downgrade. Well, it may not be the emotion I would have put down there. I mean, I put apathy down there, but I do know that, no, we'll throw it out as a question. Judgment lives where on the change grid? And I'm talking about critical, snipey judgment, not judgment as a detached examination of the facts. So where do you think that judgment of
I think it's got to come down grid because it's analytical.
yeah, the person is basically going like, I'm smarter than they are. I know the stuff better than they do. This is old news to me. So we tried that before, it didn't work. You know, I can hear all sorts of languaging that
It's a
goes
total waste of time. We hear all
total waste of
didn't work.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, are we're just waiting for the opportunity to say, I told you so.
Yeah.
You know, that to me feels that I'm disgusted with everybody and everything all around me because somehow or another I feel like I'm above the fray in whatever dimension you want to look at. So I can see where disgust might actually happen there, but I also know that very far down grid is where we relax, where we mellow out, a great place to take a nap or get a good night's sleep. And so I don't think that disgust is guaranteed when you are down grid. It's just one of the things that could happen. Just like out grid, anger is one of the things that could happen. It's not necessarily always going to happen. That being said, fear, I guess if you're as upgrid can get, fear would be the instinct that keeps you alive up there. But there's a continuum, there's a range that hopefully the adjective map helps to address. But yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask Joseph again what I know you're looking at Ekman's model and you're placing it on the change grid.
Yeah, I'm going to slide that in just so you guys have it.
What drove you to those particular items in the outgrid area? What was your logic around that?
So thank you for asking. So I think that I associated this anger with aggression, and on this website that T shows right now, there's an explanation. I think in the tab response. So he describes it as unableness to break through a barrier. Mm-hmm. So that was the trigger that put me in that I put it in out
because some sort of cognitive process has happened. It isn't all just emotion or an instinctual reaction.
That was the explanation that triggered me.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can read this, so I've tried making it bigger, but it doesn't want to cooperate. So anger, we get angry when something blocks us or when we think we're being treated unfairly. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, our fear of danger lets us anticipate threats to our safety. No argument there. Sadness is a response to loss. So they're saying grief is in-grid. And feeling sad allows us to take a time out and show others that we need support. A lot of that resonates with in-grid, very far in-grid, the amiable on the darker side. But grief is also creates the question, now that I've lost whatever, how can I XYZ? So that statement structure alone implies that perceived ability has gone down and perceived challenge has gone up. So that would move me upgrid as far as grief is concerned.
So T, you would put grief upgrid then, is what you're saying?
Anger, grief, fear, and shame have always been upgrid.
Okay.
Now, keep in mind that we have never talked about the emotions that are in grid and out grid. If you think about where we talk about emotions, we talk about emotions as they connect to the 5 levels of productive tension. So our focus is on the vertical result of their plottings. So that's why we don't have anything that's specifically out grid. Now, if we said, well, if we look at power and we're in the center of power, we put there, that's where confidence and pride and all those good sorts of things happen. But if I say, no, create a continuum from very far in grid to very far out grid and tell me how those emotions might change, I could certainly tell you that as someone moves further and further out grid, that confidence becomes arrogance, that arrogance becomes aggressiveness, perhaps. And so it can become very dominant, domineering, all those sorts of things. And I believe anger would appear there as well as upgrid. And if I look very far in grid, I know that that person is the one who has no sense of confidence whatsoever, little if any self-esteem. I would not be surprised to find elements of fear there. So, yeah.
But if the challenge is low,
Even if
that
the challenge
situation.
is low, this is where we say that it depends on what they have on their change grid. People that have been really victimized, that are the worst possible example of the worst possible aspects of that amiable energy, are very much uh, in an abused situation. And so on their change grid, there's a whole lot of activities that we would routinely find on everybody else's change grids that don't appear on theirs. That they can't even put it on their grid, let alone respond to it. So generally what their primary activity is to survive for the day. And so their ability to do that is quite low. The challenge of doing it, at least in that moment of assessment, they will go, at least I'm safe for now. But there is this fear. Again, if we looked at that very in-grid spot, you would see, let me just go up a slide for a second, that all 5 levels of tension are fully present in perfect ratio. So there's no difference to the ratios of the 5 levels of tension, just right there on the change grid. And that continues to be true no matter where I go, the ratio is going to hold true on those 5 levels of tension. Well, that was a
Steve,
lot of an answer. So yeah.
Do you buy into, I don't know whose theory it was, that all of the emotions are subsets of the primary fear and love?
That was me. That's where I mean, I've learned that as a spiritual kind of truth, that
Yeah,
fear,
yeah.
fear,
Can I respond?
Sure,
yeah.
please.
During my research, there was something called the history of researching emotions, and some of the earlier researchers they had this dual set of positive and negative. So that's actually what you say, David.
Yeah, I saw
Sorry to
that
interrupt.
the only two emotions were whatever word would describe none of your needs are being met and all of your needs are being met. And so I can see how none of my needs being met would make me feel very much afraid. And all of my needs being met would make me feel very secure. And so I can see how that might be packaged as love, because there's nothing not to be loving. Everything's just,
So I keep coming back as I hear all this when we tune it and go, is that we really do have different wirings of how to react to the same basic thing. Even when you mentioned grief being upgrid, I think that is the case, but I could see an in-grid grief as well. I wouldn't change what you put on the at a glance, but I also,
Right.
particularly when you get down to apathy, I think that when people stay there for a long time, around a mission critical activity. It's
Mhm.
always just afraid to venture out of some
That's
sort.
right. There's
So
lots of
all kinds
regret
of
down there,
emotions
etc.
could ensue. Some people could just enjoy being bored, and others would just be frustrated to death.
Absolutely, absolutely. And see, it was when those realizations started happening, and I don't know how many years ago this would have been, but a good long while ago, that's when I said, look, this doesn't explain human behavior as a two-dimensional diagram. So to understand some other aspects of humanity, I need to know what's the missing dimension. And that's when I found out that you could turn the ChangeGrid into a cylinder, you could change the ChangeGrid into a cube, or you could change the ChangeGrid into a sphere. And as you added that three-dimensionality to it, and now we've added a fourth dimension, more and more things started to make sense. So that's why I'm kind of like, I'm perfectly fine again, going like, there aren't 4 red spots, there's 1 red spot. I just had to flatten the diagram, flatten the sphere. So each corner got its own share of that little red spot, you know? So,
Have you ever plotted any of the primary EQ models out there, either the Goldman or the EQ2?
I've looked at it, but again, it doesn't generate a map that easily overlays. And in fact, I have a bunch of those to show you guys. They're very beautiful arrangements of how emotions progress based on intensity of some hallmark emotion. And some of the models have 6, some have 7, some have 8 different what those central emotions might actually be. But when you start to look for a sense of continuity around whatever the diagram is, I've only found one. I shared it with you guys last week. I wanted to show it to you again today, but I'm not convinced that it, you know, well, good grief, I'll just throw it in right now just so you can see it, but I want to, you know what I'm babbling about. La, 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 da, da, da. This one, the flower. And I went like, okay, finally, one that has some continuity. So we have these little 8 petals, but when I look at the center, I go, these are the most extreme. Well, if you were in a place, if you were in the center of the ChangeGrid, would you be experiencing the perfect balance between rage and terror and loathing and admiration and grief and ecstasy and vigilance and amazement? No, you'd be experiencing whatever these 4 tips of these petals are. And these would be the extremes. So I said, somehow or another, we need to re-blossom this flower. So, but this is the only model that I have found so far that gives me any sort of a visual representation of continuity as I go around it. I just think it's inside out. So
The EQ2 has in the center emotional intelligence, and then it has self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal decision-making, and stress management. And each of those have 4 inside. They have emotional self-awareness, self-actualization, self-regard. But I don't think there is continuity. I don't think the wheels.
no, yeah, because I was looking at it now. This particular meal, this I think a wheel is Plutchik, Plutchik.
I've seen that before.
Yeah, that's one wheel of emotion that I found. What's interesting about Plutchik, I'm sorry, I don't know how to properly pronounce his name. I mean, no one says my name right, so what difference does it make? So, but this also came from his model that just says there's a stimulus event, and then you do some sort of cognitive appraisal that gives you some subjective reaction that leads you to a behavioral reaction in order to gain some sort of function, to serve some sort of function. So if you have a threat of some sort, you're in danger. That subjective one is fear, which, by the way, let me slide this back into place, is not the worst expression of fear. It's this kind of core one. I really look at this little ring to line up to this. That leads you to escape, and that's safety. So danger only has escape as a behavioral survival function, response. I'm sorry, that's just not true. Now, unless we're saying that we encounter an obstacle which makes me appraise it as an enemy, triggering anger, which makes me attack. Now at least I've got there's fight, and up here was flight. So, and then you destroy the obstacle. And then here we have an unpalatable object, which by the way could be a human, is experienced or interpreted as poison. So we get disgusted. That makes us want to hurl. And so why? Because we're trying to eject the poison. I don't know how that applies to people that disgust us, but okay, fine. So, I want to get back to this. We can do that on Thursday's call. But what I really want to do is finish what Joseph put together. I did slide into place though. This is the Atlas of Emotions, atlasofemotions.org. If you want to go and check it out in more detail, quite a bit of material here. You can scroll through lots of very interesting dynamic illustrations that you can go through. So you might find that very useful.
Yeah, there's also responses there. Avoid, dehumanize, vomit, withdraw. So that actually corresponded with the adjective map. There was no continuum, but
right. But still, it could be useful. Like sadness, mourn. Interesting. They've put grief down as a form of. All right, fine. And so again, things are never going to perfectly overlay as we find other models to integrate. That's the whole point of the merging of brilliance. It is our hope that as we discover other models, rather than saying one's right, one's wrong, whatever, we just recognize they all have very different levels of sophistication. They have very different levels of research that went behind them. They have very different purposes that drove them to be created, very different ways they're being utilized. So we're not expecting it to always overlay. What we are hoping for is that whatever that model happens to be adds something to our understanding of the change grid, helps us to flesh out our map of humanity in greater detail. And we simultaneously hope that as it is merged into the change grid, that the change grid adds greater depth to whatever their model happens to be. So I would like to think that by merging, we'll just choose one, the disk profile into the change grid, that the change grid actually enhances the disk profile. So that's why it's the merging of brilliance. There is no right, there is no wrong, there is only brilliance. And our goal is to seek out that brilliance in all of its forms of expression, examine it even at a very superficial level. And if it engages us at a superficial level, we take a deeper dive and a deeper dive and a deeper dive until ultimately we get into the process of merging that brilliance.
The issue with this is that this shows no causation. This is just simply result. So when you have the change grid and you have challenge and ability, it shows causation.
Yes. Right, because those perceptions are always of something. So something has to have led to however we are responding.
I like the word trigger that you used before,
Trigger.
T. I think that's the key word, because it's
Yep.
not directly, if two people react differently to the same external thing, it's not directly causation. We just have the same trigger and we go to how we deal with fear or whatever it might be.
Yeah, now that's really interesting, because I believe that Brian on one of the call was talking about where the cause comes into the equation. And so I think he was talking about that something happens, whatever it is. And we then have instantaneous perceptions around that. And those perceptions lead to some sort of brain chemistry kick it into gear. And then we will then be able to identify, or whatever, hopefully those neurotransmitters help us to identify the cause, the root cause of whatever, created whatever led us to where we are right now. So I remember it being somewhere
Two people have a different response to the same flood of transmitters.
Absolutely. And that's true, but it's also true that people are going to have their own unique set of perceptions regarding whatever that trigger event happens to be. So, I mean, X can happen, and X can be identical for everybody because X is external. X is just happening, X. Well, as we each are exposed to whatever X is, we have our own assessment we're making about our ability and the challenge and the importance of it and the size of it. So we have our own set of perceptions that have now happened. Those perceptions are what triggers that chemistry. So, and then
that is also very useful in the coaching and also in the selling situation, because if you tell somebody like, would you like to suffer a great loss if you don't buy this deal, then the perception would not always be the same. So
right,
that is very useful insight.
Yeah, because you've just given them a hypothetical scenario, and they're going to apply their perceptions to whatever that scenario happens to be. So, you know, it gets back to it's always going to be about perceptions. All right, I'd like to slide this out of the way because Joseph put together 2 more diagrams, and you know, we're coming to the top of the hour, so maybe we'll get
Joseph, thank you so much for doing this. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, it was a joy. I wanted to learn from it.
So he also did this one. And we all get to learn a little bit of Dutch now too. So these are situations and energy. So he talked about the expressive, the driver, the analytical, and the amiable. We don't need that first I, by the way, in the English, just AMIABLE. But vriendelijk, vriendelijk, what is it?
Well, actually, I made it in Dutch and I translated it to English.
All right.
But vriendelijk is like friendly.
Friendly, okay, yeah.
But it's not a translation. It is an explanation, because
all right.
I was trying to this I show to people. Well, I designed it because it's sometimes hard to explain the ChangeGrid, so I wanted to simplify it. And that is the cause of this this diagram. And
okay, so the driver is competitive, the expressive energy, enthusiastic.
I try to lean it towards the disc terminology, because lots of people in Holland, they use it. So
well, that's
trying
also
to make it user friendly for the
that's
the
also the colors then are mapping to one of the disc card system, I think. Yeah. And then let me show them the other one you put together here. These are the instinctual reactions to things, and a question came up, and hopefully we can share some insights to know this. So flight made sense for upgrid. We don't need to explore that. Fight makes sense outgrid. That's fine too. Fade, we talked about that people that are in the in-grid danger zone have already disappeared into the wallpaper, so they're just disappearing even more. But we would have put freeze, downgrid, and for whatever reason, humiliate came up. So tell us about humiliate.
Well, that's the response to disgust, right? Like like bullying. If you feel competent or able, high ability, and no challenge, then you would bully someone, and then I came up with humiliate. It's just my fantasy.
So yeah, well, but that's interesting, because if you were being bullied and you viewed your challenge as being low to handle that bully, and the abilities being very high to handle that bullying, you may very well find that behavior to be disgusting, and your way of responding to it would be to humiliate them, which is a form of fighting. Right?
No, I turn it around. So the one who is being bullied.
Oh, would be humiliated. Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you're a bit no. The ability is high. So you want to so the ultimate response to disgust is to humiliate. So if I make a cold call and I say, well, maybe I have something which might help you, and I'm hesitant in my pitch, then the person on the call might devalue me. So he said, well, I'm not talking to a professional. So his ability in his perception is high, so he can humiliate me.
That's interesting. Yeah, we would
idea
need to really think that word through, because I can see how I might end up feeling, okay, for me to feel humiliated when I have a high level of ability in a low level of challenge situation. Can any of you guys think of any kind of a scenario?
I'm thinking embarrassed.
Embarrassed? Yeah. Okay. And even
Like somebody caught me sleeping.
right. So in that moment, am I experiencing those downgrade emotions of like apathy and complacency and boredom? Or is that feeling of humiliation or embarrassment my own form of an upgrade maneuver?
There you go.
That could well be.
That sounds about right. Yeah, it doesn't feel right to me down where it is here.
Yeah. Because again, I mean, if I want to stick with my 4 Fs, freeze goes down there because someone who's in apathy just says, well, I'm going to do absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
I like freeze.
I'm just going to freeze.
Well, and it is one of the PTSD responses. I mean, it is one of the known, adrenal responses is to freeze.
Just to freeze, right?
Well, that's very good feedback, Dan.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that you put that there, because the whole idea about the circle of brilliance leading to the merging of brilliance is all about finding a model that intrigues us some way. And it's not an interesting model, honestly, if it overlays easily. It needs to be provocative in some sort of a way. It needs to have some puzzle we need to resolve. Otherwise, what's the exercise? I mean, anyone can show me a new 4-quadrant personality typing system, and I will tell you, I will go, yeah, this is how it overlays, because it's like they all overlay the same way. But now we're getting into something interesting. So I like it. I'm going to be thinking about humiliation happening down-grid, because I can see how it could also be experienced in-grid, and how it might even be something up-grid. And it might be a trigger for my outgrid response of fighting you. So if you try to humiliate me, I may very well verbally, intellectually punch your lights out. So who knows?
Well, I want to resist.
Yeah.
I have the feeling to resist your comment. And I don't know why, but let me express my thought again.
Don't feel humiliated, do you?
Yeah.
I feel humiliated, right?
Oh, never. Yeah.
No, but I'm not. I don't quite understand when you have a high ability and a low challenge. So I put it in a situation of 2 people. So if I experience no challenge whatsoever dealing with this person and a high ability, that would give me I want to humiliate. But if somebody gives me a threat and I feel able, then I want to fight him. So that was the narrative around that
well,
idea.
See, and now that's interesting, because I would say to you that if I am very far down-grid, I may very want to, and someone comes along to me and they're just, not worth my time, I can kind of see as an instinctual way to escape that situation to humiliate them. So I like it if we say humiliating as a defensive technique. So fight, flight, humiliate. That might be a technique, a ploy that I use in order to
stay frozen.
Yeah, and to get that person out of my way. Well, and again, while I think freeze is down there, if we say, well, let's not be that frozen, because I'm not in any true physical danger. So if I'm frozen and it's purely an intellectual sort of an attack, then I'm going to appear to be weak. So on the other hand, if I say, look, I know more than you know about this, so let me prove how little you actually know. Let me destroy your logic. What I am doing is humiliating you. I'm using my knowledge as a weapon.
Okay.
See-
Now I'm very, very pleased with your answer
Yeah, well, there you go.
because I can wrap my head around it now.
Right. If I use fade as a ploy, you can't see me, I'm invisible. If I use flight as a ploy, I'm not there anymore. If I use fight as a ploy, you have a bloody nose. And if I use humiliate as a ploy, you've been embarrassed and dismissed. So I can
Yep.
certainly see that as a coping maneuver in addition to freezing. Yeah. Okay. It's fun when we can make things fit. Okay. All right. Well, time's up for today.
Don't salespeople always do that?
Well, if you don't want to protect the sale, absolutely. You know, one quick thing is that how many times have you guys been trying to sell your services? Any of you been trying to sell your services, and the person you're selling to, you already know, doesn't begin to understand the situation they're in as well as you understand it, and they're pretending to understand it. Well, you're trying one way or another to convert that to a client. To humiliate them would not be the right choice.
No.
So, but you could, and I'll tell
Check
you,
that.
in your head and in the car on your drive back, oh, you're giving them the what for.
I noticed, but I never saw that in the objection handling techniques.
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, you know, it's when you're
To
once and for all,
humiliate.
yeah, when you're done with them forever, you go right ahead and do that, but you're done with them forever. A bridge
Yeah,
is,
because you want to protect yourself, right?
well, yeah, but you know, they're just going to, look, they were clueless coming into the discussion. They're just going to leave even more clueless. So, yeah, what can you do?
Thank you very much.
All righty.
Thank you,
Okay.
Joseph. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We will speak again